we will do book 13. Thank you for starting that. After that, we'll have a closing ceremony. We will cease the recording and have a period of about 30 up to 30 minutes for questions and answers. And if you have questions at any time, please use the chat box, and then we can try to answer those on a real basis. This material, many find to be challenging. Book 10, often volumes 1 and 2 often tie people up, but this one also seems to be problematic. So I have an analogy that I think works pretty well. So I want you to look up to your ceiling and pick a spot. Now, humor me here. It's kind of an interesting exercise. So find a spot on the ceiling and then take your index finger and point at it. Now begin rotating your finger clockwise. Slowly lower it to the bottom of your chin. Which way is it now rotating? Clockwise or counterclockwise? Who's got the answer? And you can speak. You can unmute and speak. Clockwise or counterclockwise?
Counterclockwise.
What happened? You were
no
rotating
idea.
your finger clockwise.
Magic.
What happened? Magic, that's right. It's a change in perspective. And when we look at natal, hore, and mundane astrology, we use many of the same tools. We're just changing perspective. A significant and deep foundation in natal is really required to be able to understand and apply hore, and especially mundane. Another way to look at this is psychology is the study of individual behaviors. Sociology is the study of groups of people and their behaviors. Natal is the study of the individual and how they're impacted by inner and outer forces. Hore is based on the concept that there is a question, there is a moment, there is a item that there's an inquiry about. Mundane is about groups of people, about locations, and about things that involve more than just an individual. So we can talk about countries, we can talk about the world as a whole, we can talk about cities, we can talk about any groups or gatherings of individuals. And that's on page 1 in chapter 1, serial lesson 141. Now, sometimes, if you will, birth dates and times can be problematic. There are a number of resources out there, including this book, the Book of World Horoscopes by Champion, that is really good in terms of giving specific dates and times related to communities and to countries. But I'm going to do an example a little later on about even how sometimes those are problematic. There are so many different, shall we say, contested dates of when the United States came into creation. Zane, of course, weighs in on this, and we're going to go through an example and do a chart based upon that, what Zane has. But just be aware that Jandro, innumerable other people have weighed in with different dates for logics. So just be sure if you're looking at an organization like the Church of Light. Vega, how was the date for the conference selected?
Well, that's kind of
Vega?
a funny, Alan. I was looking for a date to go on vacation, and I found this. They kept telling me there was no good dates. There were no good dates, and so I wasn't looking for that. I was looking for a date to go on vacation. And I showed it to Peg, and Peg went, "Oh, hey, that's a beautiful day. Okay. So that's how it happened. Oh,
But you're using mundane astrology.
we were using mundane astrology. Yes, sir.
Really,
And so picking out
electional.
Electional stuff, but yeah.
electional. And so there are a variety of even subtopics within mundane. And it's utilization to say for this organization based on its quote unquote birth chart, what would be an optimal time to meet? What would be an optimal time to carry on and take X activity? Just like you would look at your natal chart to determine much of the same thing for you, you can take a mundane chart with a broader aspect for the group of people and make that interpretation. Now, this is not limited to, shall we say, cities, states, organizations. You can also do it with companies. And it's interesting because many organizations, though they don't make this public because of perception, many organizations plan their annual meetings, many major events based upon astrological indications. There have been several different stock analysts over the years, especially one Swiss analyst who over a 10-year period, Fortune magazine named him one of the most successful stock pickers. He was trained as an economist, but he is also an astrologer. He didn't reveal until after he retired that he made extensive use of mundane astrology in terms of picking and choosing and timing the stock market and selecting companies that he would buy and sell. So the application of this is very broad, very deep. I will tell you, however, that it is a specialty into itself. Again, a foundation of understanding, a deep understanding must be had of natal, but then it expands further and once you get into mundane, because there are other dynamics that affect groups that maybe not so much in terms of, or not so impactful for individuals. If you do check a corporation, or if you're looking at a not-for-profit organization, you want to look at, you can look through the public records of the state in which the organization or company is incorporated in, when their papers filed, note the date of the signatures of directors, and the city where principal business is conducted. If they're actively traded on a stock exchange, you can look at the first date of trade. And the time is usually the time of the opening of the stock market or exchange that they trade upon. But there are some other indications in philosophy. There is a individual by the name of W.D. Gann that was considered one of the wealthiest individuals that you've never heard of. His picture hangs in the New York Stock Exchange. He was a Freemason, and he was active and utilized the aspects of mundane astrology for his selections. He is a contemporary of Zane, and matter of fact, in Gann's materials makes reference to Zane, though I have not found any reference to Gann in Zane's material. So sometimes it was not always a two relationship, but as I say, Gann made reference to Zane, especially during the 1930s, 1940s. So this is the foundation of where we're going with this. And so in chapter 2, serial lesson 142, we start talking about cycles of planets. Now, as we know, what we deem the slow moving planets, particularly Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, are generational planets. They move with such length that it exceeds the life expectancy in almost all cases of individuals. But please note, and this is where, again, you're going to get your 3-ring notebook out, you're going to probably start a new, or I suggest you start a new division for mundane astrology. And again, you're going to divide it on houses, signs, and planets, because there is a broader application of the information. If you have the green book on page 25, for instance, and this is within chapter 2. So again, if you had, depending on what edition you have and where you're looking, on page 25 is a definition of the mundane applications of houses. For instance, the first house is the people of the country or city, their disposition, health, personal affairs, as distinct from their foreign interests. Debbie, for instance, Debbie, what's the first house indication for natal? What's that relate to?
Are you asking me?
I am.
Oh, so it would be the personality, you know, how the person's presenting to the world, their personality.
Yeah.
And their personal concerns, personal issues.
Right. And so in this
physical
case,
appearance.
Yeah.
physical could be physical appearance. And what it is, it's about the individual. And where you look at the first house from mundane, it is a broader concept then about the disposition of the people in general. So it becomes more generalities and not the uniqueness of the individual, but the uniqueness of the society or the culture. And so making sure you understand and don't confuse the two, it's a broader application in almost every case. Now, cycle charts have been a source of confusion, I think, throughout the material. What a cycle chart is it's a construction. I'm going to go through an example actually on the next slide, where you take and it's recorded in the ephemeris, you can see, or you can use our program. And it's when the planet moves between north and the south declination. In other words, what would be roughly the equator of the orbit. That's not the technical term. Zane goes into great lengths to explain this and to be able to manually calculate it. But roughly, it's when it moves from essentially from the north to the south declination. In other words, where is it in relationship to the Earth? And these cycles repeat. Now, one thing Zane never really says outright, but alludes to, is that, and we saw that particularly in book 12, is that life reoccurs on regular cycles. Consequently, these cycles are aligned with, in many cases, the cycles of various planets. Now, note the cycles of Pluto, which began, and it runs for 247.7 years. And every spring, the Church of Light quarterly newsletter will give us information in terms of where we're at in the cycle of every planet. Isn't that correct, Peg? Did I say that correctly? In the newsletter, the information contained on cycles?
Yes, in the spring quarterly every year, we'll show the mundane cycles.
Right, because this is going to be important. Now, you could always get your ephemeris out and look for yourself. But again, the spring of every year, we'll be able to do it to see where we are in the cycle. Now, the characteristics of the cycle of Pluto are noted on page 35 and interesting in 86 and the fourth paragraph. One thing Zane does, and this is kind of one of the gotchas, is if you don't read all the material, you don't get all the information. That he will drop these nuggets in on maybe a totally unrelated area and make reference back to. And he's doing this quite a bit with the effects of these various planets. Now, again, because of Pluto and Neptune cycle being so long, we see that these have generational impact, but guess when, in terms of aspect, they become significant? Who would care to guess on that? When do you think these could become significant?
On their return or something like that.
Yes, yes.
I don't know what that
On-
means.
Well, and what that means is when you have established, I'm going to show you an example here in the next slide, but when it starts at wherever the location of that planet is, when the organization, the group of people, the country commences, when it starts, when it returns there, it is conjunct and has very powerful significance. Also, oppositions, squares, trines. So you have your typical aspects that we use with natal charts also have significance with mundane, but probably, though it's not said outright, but often referred to, is that the conjunct, or what's called the return, is of the most significance. And I'm going to again show you an example using Uranus. It's the cycle of Neptune, again 164. And yes, we're about to have a Pluto return, and we're about to have a Uranus return. And I'm going to use the Uranus cycle chart and show you how to construct it using our program and why it's significant. Both of these planets have characteristics that might be considered to be problematic, is a nice way to put it. And we're also, as we conclude a cycle, the conclusion of a cycle is often very turbulent for these either neutral or Malthus types of planets. And again, on cycles, except on Neptune, you can see the characteristics on page 36. And it's not as an extensive a list as you saw within Pluto. And as we get to the slower moving, or excuse me, the faster moving planets, the list of attributes become even more pronounced. So let's go into chapter number 3, serial lesson 143. This is significant for a number of reasons, particularly because the initiation of the United States is often associated with the planet of Uranus. Every country has an association with a planet or an aspect that you'll read about in the world horoscopes and within this volume as well. When a return happens, in other words, when the planets and the transit come back to the point that they were originally when the United States was founded, it has historically been a time of great turbulence. Now, the cycle for Uranus is 84 years. And it coincides with world war, with great economic issues, and with, for lack of a better word, we'll say instability of the nation, where things really had to come together or the country was in jeopardy. And this will be happening again. Uranus is a planet of extremes and unexpected happenings. You look at and see that on page 48. And you go through and you look at the occurrences that he talks about in this chapter, and you go, oh my gosh, fasten your seatbelt. This is going to be a turbulent time. So I thought maybe the best way to do this was to actually, I'm going to stop sharing here, and I am going to pull up a chart. So, and I'm going to construct it, a cycle chart from scratch, and kind of give you an idea of how this works, because it's really pretty cool. So let's share the screen on this bad boy. All right, I'm going to full screen this. When you're doing a chart, I already have this one recorded because I use it quite a bit, and I will use several different United States foundations. So I have one from John Rowe, but we're going to use the US formation date for Zane. When you open it up, what this is going to do is open the box and give you the information here. that July 4th, 1776 at 2:14:43 a.m. And note that this is local mean time. When you do a chart, you must always be concerned, not only is it daylight savings time or what we call standard time, but particularly when we get back into the 1800s and before, time zones really didn't exist. You could have cities that established their own, and you need to find out what the local time really was. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which gave the longitude and the latitude, you always want to confirm that. And so what we're going to do is, since this information is correct, we're going to close the box. And everyone see the chart okay? Yes? Okay. So what we first want to do is we want to progress the chart. Now, I know a return is coming up. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to progress this to 2025. And I'm going to put July 4th. And I'm going to change the time zone to Eastern time. It isn't where I am that's important. It's where the organization is that is relevant. Also, during this time, July, it's going to be daylight savings time. We have that now. We did not before. So what we're going to do is we're going to press OK. And at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to also view transits. Now, I typically leave the majors up just to see where we are. So note that Uranus, the transits at 29 Taurus, 2953. I'm going to use this slide to progress it to two places. First, I'm going to progress it, interestingly enough, to the progressed, the day, I'm going to ask the date, to the progressed location of Uranus. Oh, need to go months. 6. I know
Yeah, you gotta watch out for the slider, Alan.
Yep, it's tricky. So 7, there's 7, 17. Oops. It depends how sensitive your mouse is or isn't. 7, 17. 16, 19, go to minutes. All right, so at this point, note the date. Oh, it didn't advance. Sorry, got the wrong one. 7, 17. Now, note here that we have the progressed Uranus and the transit Uranus in conjunct state on December 15th, 2027. Now, make note of that, because this is, and interestingly enough, in this situation, is the beginning of a period of upset. Notice this is on the cusp of the first house, at the very end, if you will, of the 12th house. So we'll count that as a first house event. Then what we're going to do is we're going to advance it further, because we've got our 27 date. We're going to advance it further to where it is then conjunct 853. Now what we've done, we're conjunct with our natal Uranus. This is actually called the return. This is where it happens every approximately 84 years that Uranus returns to the spot transit where it was at in 1776. Now, what's the significance of this? It's 7 to 8 degrees of Gemini. Now, this is where in mundane astrology, it becomes a little more interesting. Zane does not use fixed stars per se. but he does use more general locations. For instance, in terms of classification, we see the zodiac represented with 4 major classifications: representative of the eagle, representative of what other items? There's 3 others: the eagle, who's got the other 3?
The lion,
The lion.
The bull.
What's another one? The
Taurus,
The
bull.
bull.
and
Yes.
Scorpio, I was gonna say, but that's an eagle.
Yep.
The,
It's man.
the man and the Sag.
Aquarius.
Yeah. Yeah. So what you've got are these general representations. Well, guess what is at 7 to 8 degrees Gemini? The eye of the bull, Aldebaran, which in looking at the sky appears to not change location. It's been in this location since 1276. Just fascinating. We don't use fixed stars as such, but we use the symbology associated with it. This again has been a problematic transition, a very turbulent time for the United States. We also would look at, and let me just, if you will, do this. I'm going to close it, and I'm going to eliminate a lot of the other distractions and do a cycle chart. Because the only thing that matters here is Uranus. And note its location, note its relationship then with any of these other characteristics, and you would come up with an additional information. This is how you start doing a cycle chart. And that's why I say you really need to have a fundamental understanding. So again, if we look at what Zane had, it's in the first house. First house is reading from, this is what, page 25, is the people of a country or city, their disposition, health, personal affairs, distinct from foreign interests. So we're talking about domestic situation. We're going to talk about which house? We're going to be talking about Gemini. Gemini, countries, United States, representing at 7 degrees, well, 7 to 8 degrees, because this kind of depends, along with some others, and also represents, if you will, turbulence. If we look at planet itself, Uranus, and this is on page 29, in thought, the occult and ultra progressive, in business, invention, and unusual methods, in politics, the radical element. And we can define it further from there. But this is the way that you start in setting a chart and start working with this. So, makes sense? Totally confusing? The software I'm using, Rebecca, is the Church of Light software. And it is what we have set up that follows Astrodyne's and the others. Yes, Horoscope 2020, and I understand there's going to be another release of that coming in the not too dear future, in the not too distant future. So this is a program, if you will, that's very appropriate, very straightforward, and it's very inexpensive compared to most of these others. Vega, what's the current cost of the program? Do you remember?
225 or
225, and
Yeah.
I think you can look at some of the others, and they're $600 to $1,000 or more with all their modules.
Absolutely.
So this is just, again, what we use. It's geared specifically to our needs, and finding cycle charts, for instance, is very problematic in some of these other programs. Not all of them have it. Certainly not the Astrodynes and other things that we'd use in Natal, or the power of these. So you kind of make use of this information. So as I say, this is a specialty that until you're well grounded in Natal, that you probably don't want to get distracted too much by exploring. But when you feel comfortable, and when you start feeling like, I didn't start doing any work until I completed the books. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that, But for me, that gave me the foundation to be able to understand. And yes, Gene, there is a plan. I don't know where he's at now in terms of adopting this to a Mac, but I know it's been discussed.
Right, thank you.
Because today everything is Microsoft specific.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so this just shows you that yes. I'm sorry?
Patricia does have her hand up. I don't know if you noticed.
Oh, I did, and I don't have the full view up. Patricia, what question do you have?
Patricia? Okay, she didn't have a question, I gather.
Oh, okay, not a problem. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. I wanted to give you a flavor for the construction of this and how we use the software. It helped me to better understand the application and also to say, well, I better wait until I have more foundation for this. Chapter 4, serial lesson 144. Saturn is always a challenge. It is the planet of safety and economy and poverty. If you read on the attributes on page 66 and 88, it has opposite of Uranian features. It's very conservative and more persistent, whereas you see your Uranian is more, you just never know what's going to happen, and often very spontaneous and not also very positive. It's also considered one of two business planets, Jupiter and Saturn together on page 90. Rules the land, buildings on the land, the crops, minerals, utilities, and it's a cycle of every 29.4 years. When you're doing corporations and looking at mundane charts for corporation, Saturn and Jupiter are the two primary cycle charts that you look at because they will relate to business cycles. Bill Monroe is an individual that has done a lot of work in this area, and he actually called the last recession and expansion based upon cycle charts of Jupiter and Saturn, along with other aspects based upon the New York Stock Exchange and the S&P 500. Jupiter, note on page 89, paragraph 3, the expansion of business and success. This is the planet of opportunity and expansion, as it says. On page 89, let me just read that because I think it's kind of fascinating. 89, the third paragraph. The influence of Jupiter on everything he contacts is in the direction of expansion. He is the salesman whose goodwill and joviality enable him to sell his wares or services at the highest price. Large and generous by nature, he spends no time in petty haggling over small differences in cost. His customers will buy from him even if they must pay a little more than elsewhere because he is such a good fellow. So you can look at, again, where a company's progress or problems are, and you can relate that to the position often of Jupiter and Saturn. Page 90, the sixth paragraph, it deals also with interstate commerce, public expression of opinion, usually in a positive way. It can be negatively aspected, and that's something that obviously you have to look at. Because remember, nothing is universally positive or negative. It's all going to be dependent of what else it's an aspect to. Page 108, paragraph 5, financial issues to the forefront. So again, this can be very positive or it can be problematic. The court system and arbitration between countries, right, is also related to this. If you look at, just as an interesting aside, the chart of the US and compare it then to the chart of Russia, you will see that Jupiter comes out quite in a challenging position. The cycle is 11.6 years, and so you can see that it turns pretty quick. Chapter 6, serial lesson 146, Mars. Mars is, he's kind of a mess. Zane gives us good information on page 107 of this material in terms of where things are related and how a progressed aspect has significance. Also, if again you look at United States and Russia and you look at the position of Mars, you might want to start holding your breath. This could be quite challenging. It's the most energetic of all planets, consistent with its natal position, can be very violent and very, very quick action. Again, if you look at the relationship between the two countries, it is kind of scary. Accidents, as Zane says, can often be predictive from that. And you also look at thoughts, business, military, politics. So the influence both of Saturn and of Mars, when you're looking at the United States right now, and or you're looking at Russia, you can see that there's a large potential for conflict. Chapter 7, 147, the major conjunctions. Page 132 to 143, I strongly recommend the writing out of all of these relationships. It is extensive from everything, starts out with Neptune conjunction with Pluto. And notice that the focus is on conjunctions, because conjunctions are the most powerful and in many cases the most significant. So if you find a conjunction on a cycle chart, it is really important to take note of that. And you also on page 131, paragraph 3, talks about the relationship with energy and how that energy is transmitted and transformed. Chapter 8, page serial lesson 148, cycles of the sun. One thing that I do every year, and I do this not on January 1st, but on the beginning of the zodiac year, with the beginning of Aries, is I will take a snapshot then and use that as a forecast for what the next year will contain in general. And again, you would do this with your country, your state, maybe your city, depending on that question. And I compare that then to on my birthday, when I have my solar return in my natal chart. And then I will compare the two to see where there's opportunities or areas to avoid issues. There's a specific reference, again, back in chapter 2 on each house impact, page 25, and you do want to make notes of those. 149, cycles of the moon. We use this extensively. We tell, Zane recommends, and we recommend very strongly that if you're going to begin something new or a course of study, beginning it with the new moon is the most powerful. And that the reason is fully explained here. It is a month snapshot. Again, you can look at a lunar return within your own chart. Compare that to your city, state, to your school, to your business, all of these things to say, what's coming up? What are things that I can avoid? What are things that I can enhance? And then on page 170, paragraph 4, we have some specific instructions that are well worth noting. In reading new moon chart as a birth chart of the month, one can begin with the first house as representing the health and general welfare of the people and their temperament, the second house as their money and expenditures, the third house as newspapers, or in this case, the internet, science, postal service, and local transportation. The fourth house is homes and family. In doing so, it should be recommended that in mundane astrology, the houses also contain a broader significance. Thus, the second house also relates to bankers, the third house to railroads, the fourth house to crops on the soil, the fifth house as to the stock market, the sixth house is the personnel of the Army and Navy, or just the military service, the seventh house to foreign countries, the eighth house to taxes, ninth, and so on. So it's important to catalog these and to be able to understand and relate to what this is about. Now, Peg made a reference to the election process, and that's on page 173, paragraph 4. The method followed has been to obtain the birth chart of the contending candidate, carefully weigh one chart against the other, special attention being given to the progression in the chart of each at the time, and immediately following the election, where, as sometimes happens, there is difficulty in deciding which chart with its progression is most favorable toward acquiring the office. A Hore chart is erected, and the question asked if John Doe will be elected. The chart is then judged according to the rules given in Chapter 6, Serial Lesson 91, Course 8, Hore Astrology for determining the winner of a contest. Also, we would probably recommend that you do a spread of the tarot and gain additional confirmation and understanding. The point being that any one source of information should be validated, not just taken without some verification. Page 198, in terms of disasters, particularly earthquakes, you'll see some consistency there. And again, I challenge you and encourage you to read. Chapter 10, this is kind of interesting because we have more that we don't know, and the continued research needs to be done, particularly into the impact of new stars that appear and of comets, though comets have historically been hailed as the harbinger of doom, particularly to leaders. Solar eclipses have a significant impact where they are seen for a time period that can extend for a period before and a period after. I encourage you to read page 197, paragraph 5, to have a better understanding of that, but to know that both solar and lunar eclipses are impactful, that they represent all kinds of different opportunities and periods. Okay, there's a number of different comments, and we'll come back to these. So guess what? That's the material. If you say, wow, my head's spinning, yeah, so's mine. This is something that is a lifetime of study. I will tell you from my experience, and I know Vega, Peg, Debbie, and others can probably tell you that people tend to specialize in either natal or mundane. Rarely are they good in both, and there are exceptions, but the extent of the study is different for both. And so they tend to go down one path or another. That means not to the exclusion of, it's just that one is more the focus than the other. So you may, as you complete the courses, you may decide, wow, I'm really interested in seeing how this compares to the stock market, or I'm very much interested in terms of an institution or an organization or understanding for a group. And you may go down to that. You may get into elections. I know there's a discussion in the chat, and I think Aurelio kind of threw out a few things out there. This last election threw a lot, if you get the Mountain Astrologer, it threw a lot of people under the rug. They just didn't know, they were just wrong. And this is the one thing we have to remember. The future is not fixed. What we see are possibilities. And if actions are not taken, the likely outcome, but not the certain outcome. And the same way with our understanding of mundane is these are possible, maybe likely, but still not given outcomes that will occur. All right, so Vega, why don't we do the closing ceremony? Hopefully there'll be some questions. I am not